Hello, everybody. My name is, I'll introduce myself actually to everybody who's here. I'm happy to introduce you to everybody. I'm happy to be hosting this Trailblazers webinar this afternoon, and I'll be asking some questions this afternoon. My name is Dr. Rob Wilkes, and I'm really proud to introduce you to Alexis Ander Kashar this afternoon. So she's herself a civil rights lawyer, business leader, and technician. So I'm really pleased to invite her to join us this afternoon. Hello, how are you, Alexis? Would you be able to explain, well, I'll explain briefly what the plan is for this afternoon. So I'm going to be asking Alexis a number of questions, which should take about 40 minutes. And then if you have any questions you'd like to pose for Alexis, if you could just pop them into the Q&A, into that chat box, and then I will be able to ask them as we go through, or if not, as we go through towards the end of the session. Alexis, are you ready to get started?
I'm ready. Over to you, Rob.
Lovely. We've got different themes to our questions this afternoon. So our first theme is, who are you? So really, I think we'd better start right at the very beginning with your parents, your upbringing. Where do you live in America? Do you still live in America now, where you grew up? Tell us about yourself.
Okay, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here with you and with everyone in the UK. Thank you very much for having me with you today. I really, really appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to being with you. I'm from the US, I'm from the States. I was born in New York. My parents are both deaf. I'm third generation deaf in my family. My grandparents on my father's side are deaf as well. Let's see, what else? My parents are both very, very special people. Themselves, they work as advocates themselves. They're basically advocates for change. They're campaigners. That's what I mean by being an advocate, is being a campaigner, someone trying to influence change. They're both also athletes. They're swimmers at very, very high level, athletes. They have both worked very, very hard in their lives. Both born in New York as well. The family all lives in New York. We moved from Texas when I was 12. Yeah, and now I'm back in New York myself, with my kids, with my husband and family. We're just outside of New York City, about 30 minutes north of New York City.
That's lovely. So you mentioned your parents then. What do you think was the most important lesson they taught you growing up?
Watching them fight for change in different ways for me. My parents both saw that change was needed. So, for example, they did a lot of traveling. They traveled a lot back then. And, you know, they enjoyed meeting a variety of people, going to new places, new people, but it was very frustrating because there was no access. There was no access to hotels for deaf people. So, you know, for example, my parents would say, you know, they go to the front desk, they would go to reception, and they say, could we get a wake-up call, please? Yeah, because, you know, we've got to go to a meeting or whatever. Well, the hotel didn't have any way to do that. Oh, well, we'll write a note and we'll slip a note under your door. Well, hang on. So what are they going to write on that? Wake up? So my parents were like, no, that's not going to work. So they saw that change needed to happen. They started a business. They started a manufacturing business. They were manufacturing equipment for travelers. And, you know, they sort of did hotel kits. And that started like 45 years ago. They were working with hotels. So loads of hotels in the US have got their kits in their hotels. They've got doorbells, they've got flashing light alarms, they've got all sorts of equipment, basically to make rooms accessible for deaf people. And I watched them working really, really hard with their business. And for me, for example, needing interpreters, I needed interpreters for high school. And my parents had to fight with the school district to get me interpreting services. And I watched all of that. I watched them go through those fights and those struggles. And I think that's why I've sort of internalized this idea of advocacy. I think it's in my blood. So, you know, how they talk to people, you know, how people talk to each other at the dinner table, what their day looks like, what advocacy looks like, what sort of stuff they were doing. And I learned so much from the two of them. And, you know, making things accessible for deaf people. I mean, obviously having access to sign language from birth, so being able to see that as a language. I think my life has been very, very different because they were my parents.
That sounds absolutely lovely. That and very inspirational, your parents, throughout your life. So you talked about school and having access to interpreters in school and to education. Tell me about your education. What was that like? Did you attend a school for deaf children, or were you educated in mainstream?
Right. I started a school for deaf kids, which was preschool. Yeah, which is sort of the ages of 2, 3, and 4. So I went to that school. It wasn't really it wasn't mainstream, but it was a day school for deaf kids. Then at 5, they said, no, we're going to send her back to a hearing school. And my parents were a little bit like, really? My father thought that I should stay at the deaf school. My mum said, well, you know, maybe a change will be good. We'll see what happens. So I was sent to a hearing school. That's when I was 5. I had no interpreters. So I just went along to school. I was in a regular class, sat at the front, trying to read, trying to lip read, taking notes and so on. And I did that until high school. So I think I was probably 13 or 14. My parents said, no, you need interpreters. So the school district said, no, they weren't going to provide them, right? She's done without interpreters, so she can carry on without it. My parents had to fight the school district for that, to get that provision. And they fought for a year and they won. They won that fight. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, but it really, really changed my life. Before I would sit, you know, I would watch, I would study and so on. That was fine. But with interpreters, it was just so much easier. Yeah, I could actually sit and relax. I could sit and, you know, I could have a laugh. Oh, why is everyone laughing? Oh, now I get it. So it was just much more comfortable. And I just felt much more myself. I could participate much more, participating in clubs. Yeah, so really having an interpreter there really, really changed my life. So from high school, second year of high school onward, I had interpreters through college, through law school and so on, through all of my studies. So it was great.
I think a lot of deaf people in the UK have very similar experience with not having access to interpreters throughout their education in juniors and primary education and comprehensive. But it's not until a lot later on where they have access to interpreters and realise what they've been missing. Now, you talked about, you know, your education there and going to clubs. And do you have any favourite subjects when you were in school? Maths, science? What were your favourites?
Maths, no. No, I did not like maths.
Nor me.
Because growing up, it was really hard to understand because they were writing on the blackboard. They were talking while they were writing on the blackboard. And it was just really, really hard to follow. But reading science, history, literature, I could read all of that, so I could actually take all of that in. And I love reading. I really, really love reading. So anything that I could read was easy for me. So, you know, I really, really, I enjoy information. I enjoy learning about different cultures, about different people, and, you know, how other people live. I really, really enjoy that. And I can get all that through books. Clubs as well. I joined loads of clubs when I was in high school. Yeah, because I felt like sort of I was making up for everything I'd missed in previous years. So I just joined everything. I wanted to see what it was like. I really, really enjoyed it. One club that I carried on with was the government, the student government council, that club. Yeah, I was also a cheerleader. I don't know why, but I was. Yeah, it was fun. It was good fun. Yeah.
Brilliant. Quite a range there. Lots of interest in lots of different activities and subjects.
Yes.
Obviously, your passion for reading perhaps is connected to my next question. At some point, you decided to study law and attend law school to become an attorney. Why is my question?
Right. When I was in high school, as I mentioned before, right, I was watching my parents fight for my right to have interpreters at school. So I saw that and I decided that I wanted to go to law school and I wanted to specialize in what we call special education law. Yeah. So I wanted to represent other families that had children that were in the same situation we were in. I wanted to make sure that those kids had the right education, the right services. Right, we call it appropriate education in the US. It's basically matching the child's needs. So I think I decided in high school that was my plan. That's what I was going to do. So I went to college. I studied finance, yeah, because I hated maths, but I wanted to learn a bit to make sure that I really understood some maths. So I studied finance for a while, and then I went to law school after that.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're moving on to our second theme of this afternoon, which is your work, and obviously going into private practice when you were an attorney. Could you tell me a little bit more about the areas of private practice that you specialised in?
Sure. After I finished law school, I moved to California. Yeah, I moved to Los Angeles. And that's where I practice in a small private law firm in California. And like I say, we're specializing in two areas of work there: special education law, which I'd mentioned before. Yeah, that firm is very, very famous for special education advocacy. Yeah, so I took on a lot of different kinds of disability cases there. Some of it was to do with deaf education, some of it was to do with people with autism, some of it was to do with people with learning difficulties, learning disabilities. So I did a lot of that. At the same time, US law in America was changing with the Disability Act, ADA, Americans with Disability. So there was a lot of work related to that in terms of disability rights. So that was all happening at the same time. So it was the special education work and the disability work. And it was a great opportunity to be part of something new. And it was an opportunity to make changes. And I think that's sort of what started my career.
You mentioned the Americans with Disability Act there, the ADA. And I know there was a lot of work focusing on that area of law, but what impact did that have on your work?
I knew my time was sort of limited, so I decided basically to take on the cases which would have the biggest impact on the widest number of people, the most change possible. ADA at that time, it was very, very new. It was for private businesses only. We have something called 504, right? It's part of the it's part of government access. Yeah, people accessing the government. ADA broadened that out to private businesses and companies. So I saw it as an opportunity basically to mold the law and to make changes. We could actually say this is what it's going to look like. So we were taking on those cases that we had never dealt with before. So for example, one of my first cases, it involved the highways. Yeah, and they have call boxes, phone boxes on the highway. So if there's an emergency, you can pull over and you can make a call. You could ask for the fire department, or you could call for an ambulance, or you could call for whatever assistance. Deaf people couldn't do that. Okay, so we had to make sure, we had to go to the towns and cities and so on to say, hang on, you have to include TTY, text to phone services, so deaf people can access those emergency phones. Now, I mean, at that time, there was nothing there. There was no access, there was no equipment to make those things accessible. Yeah, so what a great time to be making changes right from the beginning. So that then changed all of the call boxes, like all over Los Angeles. And we saw that we could make that huge change just because something wasn't in existence, yeah, doesn't mean that you can't do it. So I started to think, hang on, there's lots of different ways that we could deal with this. We could use this. So we started taking on more and more cases where we could be looking at new innovative solutions to make access happen for people. And that's what ADA did for us in the US. It really motivated and drove a lot of innovation in terms of technology and access.
Absolutely amazing. I think we need more cases like that over here in the UK. What an amazing achievement, you know. But what do you think your greatest achievement has been throughout your private practice?
Yeah, it's a hard question. For me, I really love seeing all of the kids that we've supported, that we've been advocates for in terms of getting good education, seeing them grow and develop, see them become contributing adults in society, in their community. Yeah, and seeing that to me is just amazing. It's what I feel is one of my most worthwhile achievements in terms of my law practice. I think it's something that I'm really, really proud of, to see those kids now, yeah, who are now in their 20s and 30s and so on, and seeing them, yeah. I don't know where they don't know me, but I know them. And seeing that they've had the right education, and it's made such a big difference for deaf people. It's made such a difference for us.
Absolutely brilliant. You've been such a busy lady in your private practice, but I know you've done so much voluntary work as well. So we're going to ask a few questions about your voluntary work. And I know when you first started your own family, you did continue to practice. Why did you continue to practice? What were you doing?
Right. I've got 3 kids. When the first child was born, I took some time off, I think 3 months, and then I went back to work. I went back to work 4 days a week. And when the second baby was born, I went back to work 3 days a week. Yeah. When the third baby was born, right, I just thought, oh no, hang on, this is a lot of work having 3 kids. So I decided to stop my practice, yeah, focus on raising my kids. So I did that. But like I said before, advocacy is in my blood. I grew up with advocates in the family. I grew up with it. My parents were advocates. They were always fighting. It was a huge part of my career. And I couldn't just stop doing it. I couldn't just stop working. So I started to volunteer. So I worked in 2 organizations. I did some volunteer with 2 organizations, National Association for the Deaf, yeah, and the school board for the New York Education Board. So that was the beginning of my volunteer work with those 2 groups. So I didn't give up law 100%, but you know, I was sort of keeping my foot in and being involved, yes.
Staying flexible, isn't it? And obviously when you were working for the National Association for the Deaf, for NAD, you were getting involved in lots of other work with other groups. Can you tell us a little bit more about the type of work that you were getting involved in?
Yeah, so with NAD, I started by volunteering for the civil rights group. That was under their public policy umbrella. So civil rights came under that. So I started volunteering with them first. And then some years later, I became the chair of that committee. I then became the chair of the public policy umbrella group. So still working with civil rights. There were a few other groups that I worked with. I worked with some international groups. I worked with some education groups. So, you know, we sort of added on some other groups. There was a bioethics group that I was doing some work with. Emergency access services. So we were involved in several different groups. And I think it was nice to be able to be the chair of those groups when they were starting and to be able to work together. So I think my work with NAD, I think a lot of my work was with them, and that's what I really enjoyed.
So your voluntary work became a full-time job almost then?
Well, trying to manage it, yes. Also, you know, having the kids, the volunteer work. So the volunteer stuff was for me and my needs, and then it was having the balance with the family.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're going to do a big shift to what you're doing now. I believe you're no longer practicing as an attorney, am I correct?
Yes, I'm not taking on cases anymore, but I've shifted my advocacy to look at other pathways, really. It's all tied together, it's all linked in, and it's all tied to accessibility for me. There are 3 areas that I focus on at the moment. One is sports. The second one is branded jewelry and apparel. And technology, so looking at new technology. So I'm focusing on the first 2 at the moment, with some technology developments going on. There are a few things that we've got going, they're not ready yet, but we're still working on it. But there is a common thread going through all of it, and it is about accessibility.
It's quite a departure from law, quite, a different way of going into. So why did you decide to stop practicing law?
Well, I decided it was time to broaden how I could change things, how I could make changes. Advocacy, you can do a lot, but there are limits. It has its limits. The real change comes from the power of human interaction, human connection. It's through that human connection that you create a different mindset of the people around you. Yeah, and change comes much faster that way. Advocacy is great. Advocacy is good for some things. So I just decided to shift my advocacy efforts into other spaces, things where I could expand and make changes in another way. So I have a real strong belief in human connections. That's part of the reason, why I've made those changes.
And that makes complete sense. So we're moving on to our last theme, and it's the impact that you have had. So I've got a few questions talking about social justice, but what does social justice mean to you?
Wow, it's a big word. And I think it depends on what it means to you, to the individual. For me, I think social justice is equality, it's having the human connection. Yeah, if you don't have the connection, you're not going to have that. So to create that change, to create social justice, you need people to understand your journey. You need people to understand what your needs are. You need people to understand your language. Yeah, they need to understand the parts of your journey. Yeah, that's how you can then make changes in social justice. So through that way of thinking, I include that way of thinking in my volunteer work. So, for example, in sports, yeah, people come together, yeah, to watch who wins and who loses. People get together, they have that relationship. It's a competition, it's a game. So, one example of how we can change people's mindsets, yeah, people's perceptions, yeah, is through my volunteer work. It's an opportunity to bring those people together. Yeah, so we work with the American football. It's the National Football League, the NFL. Okay, so we've got them together with NAD, National Association for the Deaf. Yeah, to bring more accessibility into football. So why is that important? Yeah, people can just sit and watch the football. Yeah, what does access look like? Yeah, that then becomes part of the conversation, what access can look like. So that's the bridge, we're bringing people together. So we started simply with having captioning, subtitling. Yeah, back then, television commercials were not required to have captioning. So, for example, with the Super Bowl, yeah, one of the biggest football games in America, yeah, people want to see their commercials. Some of them are really funny, yeah, or they're really special commercials that are saved and put on the Super Bowl. So we said to the NFL, hang on, can we put captions on those commercials? And they said, well, it's not required. Yeah, so we talked to the NFL, NAD, NFL, we got together, we talked to them, and through that, we grew the collaboration, right? We had actors involved, we had football people involved, we had access people involved, and it was just beautiful to see how that developed and how that grew. The reason is that people now would appreciate the deaf performers more, right? They would see them involved in this stuff. They would see ASL. They would see ASL in the music that's sung now. They would see ASL provided in pretty much everything. So that really helps our community to grow as well. Yeah, because they're collaborating with us now. And that's what I mean by the human connection. Yeah. Without that power, you can't beat it. You know, you can be you can fight forever, but without that connection, you're not going to get those same achievements. You're not going to have the same effect.
Yep, absolutely right. It seems very clear to me that you are definitely a leader. What do you think makes a good leader?
Right. Really, my sign for leader has now changed. Because one person can't do it. It's about working collaboratively. It's having collaborative leadership. It's about having that mindset. So first of all, you need to have a vision. Yeah. So shoot for the stars. Yeah. What's your objective? What is your vision? What is it you're trying to achieve? And then you get people in to support you to do that. Yeah. And you're making sure that the whole group is moving forward. The whole group is on that journey. So you have that vision and you have that empathy, you have that understanding for different people's perspectives. You understand that people have different perspectives. Yeah. And that's the way that real change happens, is moving that group forward. You know, I think that that's the hallmark of a good leader.
So for you personally, was there anybody, or was there a group of people or a collective that really had an influence on you and your leadership? How did they influence you to become the leader that you are?
My parents. I think seeing my parents and seeing advocacy done right, seeing advocacy actually make changes. I think at the moment, I think people assume that leadership is someone who already knows all the right things to do. Well, that's not true. They don't. Yeah. We need to support each other. We need to work together. And I saw that through my parents working, the efforts that they took, the work that they did in many, many different situations, working in the deaf community, working in the business world, raising kids, and me seeing that collaboration, seeing how they worked together and how hard that was and how hard they worked together. And I've taken that on. And I think the two of them have 100% have influenced me in the way I am.
So I see you as a leader, as that collective leader. Now, obviously, you know, throughout your career, there's been decisions that you will have had to have made. What do you think has been the most important decision you have ever made as a leader?
Ooh, that's a very, very difficult question. I think my role on the board for the New York School for the Deaf system, I'm now president of the board. Right, first of all, being a deaf leader, you bring unique assets to the board. Yeah, you're deaf, you have a different perspective, you're more sensitive to the needs of the community, you're more in tune with that, you're more willing to take risks. because if you don't take risks, yeah, then you don't make changes. So for the school, there are many students there. There are many staff members there, and a lot of important decisions are made that affect them, and it's not easy. And they're not always decisions that people agree with. But I think some of the most important decisions mean talking to the right people, consulting with the right people, and making agreements that benefit the most people, and moving the situation of deaf people forward.
And it's really difficult, isn't it, to make sure you are doing the right thing, which is, you know, what you are aiming to do. It's not easy. So generally speaking, leaders, be it on their own, independently or collectively, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing the leaders of today?
I think one of the biggest challenges is the rapid rate of change. Everything is changing so fast right now, in terms of digital, in terms of technology, in terms of politics, in terms of education, in terms of the environment. All of that is just changing so fast. And we're under pressure to make sure that we fit in with all of that. I think the challenge with that fast change is remembering your decisions don't have to be fast. Your decisions still have to be evaluated. They still have to be thought through. They still have to be analyzed. Yeah, sometimes we're trying to keep up with all of these changes, and keeping that balance is very difficult sometimes. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that faces leaders, you know, in America, UK, worldwide.
Definitely. I think you're right there. My next question is about leaders. Sometimes something happens that derails them. Is there anything, is it perhaps linked to behaviour? Is there anything specific that you think can quite often trip leaders up?
I think a lack of emotional intelligence. I think you need to be, you need to be able to read the room. You need to be able to read people. You need to be able to see, almost you need to be able to see around the corner. You need to see what's coming. Yeah, you need to sense your environment very well. You need to be able to feel that. You need to read stuff that's maybe not on the wall. Yeah, so I talk about emotional intelligence. Yeah, if you don't have it, it doesn't mean that you can't get it, you can't develop it, you can't practice it. You can, you can learn it. You can learn it, you can put it into practice. It takes time and effort, but I think it's something that leaders need, definitely.
Thank you. We're moving on to talk about a slightly different area now in terms of social networking and the internet. How have both of those had an impact on you personally and your life?
Well, I think as far as deaf people, not having access to incidental learning, yeah, just picking up all this information that's out there, we don't have that. The internet has given us a huge opportunity to get access to that information. It's absolutely wonderful, yeah, in many ways. At the same time, we have to be very careful. It's very easy to get drawn into something that isn't right or isn't appropriate, or, yeah, you need to take the time to evaluate the information. And it's not easy with the internet because there's so much information there. So for deaf people, the first time we've got access to all of this, all this information that we've never had access to before. So we have to practice how to be a smart internet user.
Lovely. The last question before we see if there's any questions from our viewers this afternoon. I think it's quite a nice finish to end on. What advice do you have or would give to anybody who's going to enter a position of leadership? What advice would you give them?
Be open-minded. Yeah, dare to be different. And surround yourself with people who are different from you. Be willing to be willing and open to watch and learn and practice. Yeah, again and again and again. You've got to practice. It takes time. It takes time. Yeah, to be someone who's conscious about that. It takes time to take on other people's perspectives. Yeah, and patient. You need to be patient.
That's lovely. Thank you ever so much. I can see we have 2 questions in the chat. So our first question is linked to the WFDs, the World Federation of the Deaf, obviously the Congress in South Korea at the moment. So they just voted for UAE to host the next Congress in 2027. Now, deaf people all over the world are rightly so unhappy about this. Obviously, the UAE's records in terms of human rights is not great. What's your view on this?
I'm not there. I haven't heard all of the discussions that are going on. I've seen a few comments on a few things, but I wouldn't make comments without having more information. That's just the way I work.
And that's very much a typical lawyer or attorney's response. I think I would answer in very much the same way. So here in the UK, I'm not sure whether you're aware, we had a new BSL Act. So the deaf community and parents with deaf children had been campaigning for a very long time to make sure all families of deaf children have access to British Sign Language classes, meaning that they can help support their children and communicate with them. Do you have any advice for them in terms of campaigning to help them continue?
I think it's just amazing. For you to have to be campaigning for that and having achieved that, I think is amazing. Now, I don't know where you're at in the process at the moment, yeah, but it's something that's very, very necessary, very, very important. I'm not familiar with, obviously, with your structures and legal procedures and levels and steps and processes and so on, but I think it's just amazing, yeah. Many people in the US aren't there yet. Yeah, in terms of access. We have access to schools. Yeah, we have access to resources for children and so on, but families don't have access to those resources. So in the US, I think in some ways we are behind. I think it's just thrilling to know that the UK has campaigned for that. They're campaigning for access. They're campaigning for access for language for the families, because language starts at home. Education starts at home. The school is very limited to what they can actually teach. You're only there for a few hours a day. Yeah, the kids, some kids call school home. Yeah, because when they go home, yeah, they don't have access to language, and it's very, very hard. Yeah, And it's really trying to make sure that home is both of them. Home should be home. They should have access to that.
From what I know, it seems as though we've been having a lot of attention. We've got this message, the campaign is out, it's active on social media. We are getting it out there. We're getting the message out there that BSL is very much needed in the home. Now, with the UK government, they're not budging. They're saying, yeah, you need access within education, within the classroom, but they don't seem to have quite grasped the importance of having language at home for those early years. So that is something that we're still campaigning the government on. So we have another question in the chat. Unless you want to add something else.
I just have one question about that. In terms of the BSL Act, does that include resources for families?
Unfortunately, it does not.
That's separate.
Yeah, so the BSL Act is very limited in its scope. It's great because it's finally recognised BSL as a language in the UK, or a language of the UK, but it's not given us a right to BSL. Our ultimate aim is to get that board of deaf members together to advise the government on how to make sure that communication in BSL is accessible for families. So we're including the Department of Education. They have to think about how deaf communities communicate, but families don't yet have the right to learn BSL.
Right. I'm a great fan of taking baby steps. Yeah, you can't give up. You've got to keep going. You started. You've done some of the biggest work. You started the tidal wave. Yeah, so you've got to ride that wave now. So I think it's absolutely great.
Definitely. So if I take the next question from the chat, so it's talking about how we can help nurture children's agency so that they then become active agents for change going forward. So how are they going to be able to make those changes as they grow and develop? And how can we encourage children to fight for change? Obviously, with your history and your background, what bit of advice would you give them?
Right, I just want to make sure I understand the question. You're talking about you're talking about the kids. Sorry, I'm not sure I understood who you meant.
Our deaf children that we've got as they're growing up now, how can we encourage them as they go forward in their life to make changes, to influence change going forward in society? How do we encourage them to want to make changes for the better?
Okay, I think you need role models. And
yeah,
I mean, without my role models, I'm not sure what my life would have been like. So, going to a hearing school, yeah, nobody looked like me. When I went home, my parents were there, and my parents were communicating with me. So I had those role models. I understood what they were doing every day. At the dinner table, we had discussions, we had chats all the time. I knew what was going on. Oh, this is what it's supposed to look like. So I think for deaf kids, you have to give them those role models. You have to give them opportunities to meet people, yeah, to say, oh, I have options when I grow up. I have loads of options. When I grow up, there's all this stuff I can do, all these jobs I can do, all these life choices I can make, all these opportunities. In my time growing up, there weren't very many opportunities, but I think the role model is the key thing for that. Yeah. And another important thing is language accessibility, having both of those.
Absolutely. So there's one more question in the chat that I can see. It's quite an interesting one, I think. So if you had the opportunity to press reset on anything to date in your career, what would you change and why would you change it? So if you could press that button, that reset button, is there anything you would change?
Hard question. There are so many things that I really, really enjoy doing. I think I would have started with sports earlier. Yeah, the changes I see there have been bigger than anything I could have envisaged, anything that I've seen. Yeah, our participation in sports through access has created a dialogue, yeah, that we never would have had. We never would have had. And I think it's the fastest way to make changes. I think my advocacy work would have been more focused on mainstream events and culture and so on. Yeah, rather than advocating for a specific policy, if you see what I mean. I think that's probably only one change that I would make, maybe. Yeah.
I think that's a very good answer. Oh, we've had an additional question. Let's have a little look. I think we've got time for this one last question before we bring our session to a close. I'm not sure how much you're aware of the United Nations, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and also the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Disabled people. But if you are aware of them, do you think they're effective? Do they meet the cultural and linguistic needs of deaf people?
I've not read through the conventions in a long time. When they were passed, obviously I went through them. Every country has got their own different interpretations of those. The US doesn't even have them. So I'm not familiar with the UK, which conventions you have and have adopted and follow. So it would be very hard for me to answer that question, really.
And that's absolutely fine. I don't think we have any other questions. So I think we can start to wrap things up. So I just want to double check with Stuart if there are any other questions. Nope, that's all. That's it. That's lovely. So thank you so much, Alexis. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you this afternoon and listening to the answers to some of the questions, some very useful tips and information and guidance for anybody who's thinking about leading the way going forward. And we definitely need more collective leaders here in the UK. So I hope everybody enjoyed Trailblazers webinar this afternoon, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. But thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day, everyone. Thank you.